I love Košice. You want to go back? And this is a great follow-up after our pilgrimage.
Where are the people who were there already?
Good. All right, Barbara, if you would, please, if you can have the introduction.
Good morning. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
Today is Veterans Day, and we honor those who sacrificed for our freedoms. 2 weeks ago, we mourned for those who died, praying in the Tree of Life Synagogue. Today, Sister Barbara G. Mihalsek, who helped our Eastern Catholics struggle during our church's darkest times, the fight against communism. She will tell us their story.
Glory to Jesus Christ. So happy to be here and to go over these events with you. I actually visited Eastern Europe and worked there just after communism fell, or when it was falling apart. I was assigned to Rome on our general administration team and arrived there in October of '89. 3 weeks and 3 days later, the Berlin Wall fell down. We just had the anniversary on November 9th. But what happened just before that? A miracle, so to speak, was about to happen. There was a St. Agnes of Bohemia, part of, we call that Slovakia, who was canonized at the very beginning of November. Someone before that had a vision that said, St. Agnes appeared to somebody and said, "When I will be canonized, communism will fall." And a few days later, the Berlin Wall came down and the dominoes began to happen with Czechoslovakia and Hungary. And at Christmas time, Romania assassinated their leader, and communism fell with him. And things began to happen very quickly. And our sisters of St. Basil, sometimes called Basilican sisters and fathers, were certainly part of all the works against the churches and the need to be secretly practicing their faith and practicing priesthood, religious life, and so forth. And they found ways to do it. As we know, the communist goal was to eradicate the faith, get rid of all those believers. There is no God to them. And so they tried to destroy the faith in every way that they could. They didn't succeed because of the many who went to live their faith dynamically, but secretly. When we got word just a couple of weeks after Gorbachev came to Rome, you know, he came to Rome to meet Pope John Paul II, and it seems that the price for this meeting of a Russian communist was that he had to set free the Greek Catholic churches in the Soviet bloc, in the Soviet Union. So that was December 1st, and on that very day, a decree was given that allowed the Greek Catholic churches to register as legal bodies. Up until that time, they were illegal and could not function. And in the meantime, of course, their churches had been given over to the Orthodox, and they didn't have church buildings in which to meet, and so they were, you know, meeting secretly. The typical pattern of the communist takeover. Let's see how this is going to change here. The typical pattern was that the communists would come in and arrest the bishops, and then find a group of priests, church officials, who were scared, weak, and get them to declare that the Greek Catholic Church doesn't exist. And like magic, all Greek Catholics are gone. You see? In the church, in the official's mind, we did it. Then they would clear the monasteries. And this is what affected our sisters. It was true that the buses came in the middle of the night, gave them a few minutes to pull together their things, and said, we're taking you away. Buses, trucks, whatever it was that they. So in 1947, for instance, in one monastery, or the biggest one in Ukraine, Ivano-Frankivsk, the trucks came in the middle of the night. However, the sisters heard that this was happening to other monasteries, and so they did what they could to prepare. They cut out a hole above the third floor, and they put a box in there with vestments and the priest's books and chalices and everything that you need for a liturgy. And they hid it in this wall and sealed it up. And shortly thereafter, the trucks did arrive for them in the middle of the night and took them away. Sister Anesia is the one who told me this story. She was a young sister on the back of one of these trucks with a very sick elderly sister, and she begged the driver to let them off because of this sick sister, and he didn't want to arrive with somebody who was dead to wherever he had to go. And so he did leave them off at the side of the road, and then they went to local farmers and found help and found their way somewhere. I don't know where. Sister Anesia later served as a nurse in a nursing home in Germany with another sister. And she was part of the group that came back and helped to fight to get those monasteries back in the 90s. And then she was the one who knew where the things were hidden, and they found them all perfectly intact. We thought they should put them in archives. I think, no, we need them. Priests don't have these things. We need them. And began to use them right away. So just and this happened to monasteries everywhere. They martyred many of the bishops, the priests, the sisters, and put great pressure on those who, especially who were Greek Catholic, just become Orthodox. That's all you have to do. And we'll leave you in peace. Just become Orthodox. But the sisters largely refused to do that. The priests, many did not. They took away the churches, of course, and gave them to Orthodox, or closed them, or turned them into other things as well. And for the most part, many places, the priests, the religious, they just had to live as secular people, and yet they were keeping the faith alive. So I'm talking about 4 different countries, and I'll tell you just a little about how it was different in each of these places. So this begins with Slovakia. Entrance to Levocha and the Tatry Mountains in their glory. I happened to go through one morning and it was like a picture book. So on the left is Bishop Hirka. He was, how did they continue the faith? Well, they secretly ordained priests and bishops. So Bishop Jan Hirka, on the left, was the bishop secretly in Slovakia for quite a few years. And then when communism fell there, it was, as I said, November 1989, and by February 1990, they set up his public installation. He was already consecrated, so it wasn't that. And they needed a stadium for this event. There were so many people, and it was a great celebration. Were you there, Father? He was, okay, he can tell you more about it. So that was the day that he was officially installed, and then the church finally had a bishop in place. But they still had to struggle to get the cathedral, to get their churches, to get their seminary, and all of that had to go on. And it became his burden, along with all the priests that he could get back and get going with all of the things that were needed. I don't have a picture for every historical event because that was all before 1990. This was in 1990, 3 of us from the general administration team in front of the church, in a church in Slovakia, which at this point they had to share with the Orthodox. So there was a bit of a struggle in many of the parishes because of this. They had to set up different times and talk all the time and hopefully build relationships. We began to get new vocations in, as you see, the young people in white veils and without veil. And we began to meet together with sisters. The 2 sisters on the very right in this picture were both imprisoned at some point in their lives because they allowed priests to have liturgy secretly in their home. I brought young people from Hungary to visit the sisters in Slovakia. They had no common language, but obviously we got along. This is Slovakia. In the middle is Sister Margaret Kapusnak from the Uniontown group. She went to Slovakia to teach English for 2 years. And this is the resurrection of the monastery in Sečovce and in Prešov. Back in Sečovce. So there was a need to acquire buildings. In Slovakia, not one building was given back to the Sisters of St. Basil. Not one. Even though we owned them. But in the case of Sečovce, they bought a larger home at the end of a road where they could develop a garden. And in Prešov, they bought a small office building and added a chapel and all that they needed onto that. So, and then there were smaller homes where the sisters were living secretly, as secret sisters, and they began to develop communities there. These are all my cousins. I'm from my family's Slovakia, and the sisters arranged for me to meet my family and brought a number of them. All of them are now young adults married with their own children. This was 2001, I think, and we had formation workshops many times. That's what a great deal of my work was involved with, formation with the new young postulants and novices that are there. You see that we had some Roma sisters, the darker skinned ones from gypsy families. I had to put this one in. I put thousands of miles on this body in vans and other, all over Eastern Europe. I've probably been to Slovakia 35 or 40 times, sometimes on my way to other places as well. I've been to Ukraine 25 times, and that is beyond Slovakia from our travels. We sponsored 3 times Renaissance of Iconography courses in Eastern Europe for our sisters. During communism, they weren't allowed, the Greek Catholics weren't allowed to exist, so they certainly weren't allowed to paint icons or decorate their churches. And so 3 times we had the Renaissance of Iconography course. We, of course, prayed more than once at the tombs of Bishop Gojdich and our other martyred bishops. This is in the Prešov Cathedral. And I'm going to move on now to Romania. Beautiful, another beautiful country. This whole area is like the prettiest of Pennsylvania, really, and the weather is similar also. Romania is another land of great faith. It's basically an Orthodox country, but there have been many, many millions of, a few million Greek Catholics there for a very long time. They are not based in the Slav language. They really are Romans, basically, Romania, because the Romans founded this country, and their language is Romance language, closer, not really close to Italian, but they are able to learn Italian easier than other languages. And it's a great land of iconography, unbelievable iconography, as a large Orthodox country. In Romania, our sisters group was founded in 1946. communism shut down religious life in 1948. So right after they were founded, and they had to go and begin to live secretly. And they were refounded a number of years later, maybe around 1970, with the help of priests. Sometimes the Basilian fathers helped them, but when they were in prison, the Jesuits helped them. When the Jesuits were in prison, the Basilian fathers helped them. They've had a very, very interesting history. So they met secretly, and one sister named Joanna was ill at one point in her life with her leg. She had a terrible leg infection that took months to heal. And during that time, a secret sister who was a nurse was taking care of her. And they eventually revealed to each other that they were both sisters. And that sister was able to teach Sister Joanna something about religious life, which, because she joined in the underground, she joined as a secret sister, she didn't know much about, and they never had lived in community yet. So as she learned, then she began to gather groups of the other secret members, and she became their teacher and leader. And every Sunday she would go to a different group and teach them more about religious life. Imagine. And so finally, as I told you, in Christmas of '89, communism falls in Romania. A week later, that Sister Joanna organized a community meeting. They elected a council of leaders officially, because the previous summer, while they were still underground, we, at the international meeting of the Sisters of St. Basil, had already accepted them as new members to our order, even though they were all secret. Because there were stirrings that said, maybe, the freedom is coming. And so we accepted them all as underground members, and then just a few months later, all of that changed. And the sisters have since been able to develop new life and ministries. Their bishops were all martyred. These are some Orthodox churches we saw as we traveled. We had a Renaissance of iconography course. This is the Carpathian Mountains, my friends. These are like 200-foot pine trees everywhere. It's a gorgeous country. Gorgeous mountains, of course. And this is when we went to visit some of the painted monasteries. So there are Orthodox monasteries all over. They too went through a renaissance because they were stifled under communism, although they were not eliminated. And this particular place was a series of many, many buildings, and it was a monastery with 400 sisters, Orthodox sisters. This is Matamoros County. There was I think a horse and a donkey in that truck up ahead. I was able to get a picture from the car. And in this county, they keep the traditions, the old traditions of Romania, and the state actually sponsors that. And we had to go through there to go to the painted monasteries. A lot of woodworking because of the great forests they have. And magnificently carved icon screens. Cluj is the main city where our sisters are. It was a royal city once upon a time. This is the sisters holding a funeral when they were still secret sisters. There's Sister Joanna, and myself in folk garb. Some of the sisters right here, one of our convents. The doors lead to a driveway next to the house. And our sisters began wonderful ministries. This particular picture is at a clinic that they sponsor for pregnant women. Abortion is a huge, huge problem in Eastern Europe. I don't even want to tell you the numbers. A huge problem. And so our sisters, right from the start, with the help of these American sisters, who got the money together, helped them to establish a clinic where they encourage the women, help them with their health, and prepare them for childbirth, and help them when the children are very young. Also, they also sponsor a preschool for children and serve in the parishes as well. They're now established in 4 different cities and 4 different eparchies, I believe. This is just a couple pictures of the painted monasteries that are famous in Romania. 400 years ago, monks used fresco to put iconography on the outside of churches. This is outdoors. And this is the...
That's what I want here.
Yes. Why not? This is the Sistine, they call it the Sistine Chapel of the East because this is the Last Judgment scene, the Byzantine iconography interpretation. Very beautiful. And now we go to Hungary. So this is the Basilica in Magyapos. Did you go there on your trip?
I did.
Oh. You left them behind. So this is a Greek Catholic basilica, and it always was a Greek Catholic church. And it's from a couple centuries earlier. There was a miracle in the field. A man out in the field was approached by a wild dog, I think it was, and he was, anyway, the miracle happened there. I don't remember just how it all occurred. But then other miracles began to happen there. And so the people built a little church and then later a great church like this. Well, in August of 1990, our sisters, by the way, okay, so 1948, across the street from this basilica, my face is looking at it, is the convent of our sisters. In 1948, the communists came in the middle of the night, gathered sisters from monasteries, all kinds of other places, and they dumped them into our monastery and left them there for a few months, from June, I think, till September. Just gathered these sisters from many, and they thought that sisters would compete with one another, and we would be angry, and we would destroy religious life from the inside. Well, that's not what happened, of course. They loved one another, and they enjoyed being together. But all of a sudden in September, the authorities, communist authorities says, out with you, all of you, you must disperse. You may not wear your habits, you've got to go wherever you want to go, but your religious life is over for all of you. Well, they didn't have any other clothes. What do you think they used? The draperies, the curtains, anything that was in the house, they sewed into other clothes, and they remember laughing at each other for how funny they looked at the time. But they had to go and find a new life. Fortunately, we don't know how, the seminary, the Greek Catholic seminary in Nyíregyháza, Hungary, not too many miles from Magyapos, was not closed. The authorities forgot about it, neglected it. And it remained open. So some of our sisters got jobs there as cooks and laundresses and things like that, and lived in a little, I visited it, there was a little circle of apartments with a little courtyard in the middle, and that's where our sisters lived. They grew the flowers for the church, they supported one another, but that wasn't all of them. Some of them worked at the basilica, some of them became teachers in Budapest, and they just had to go and find and make a new life somewhere. But they did what they could to stay in touch with each other. And they took only one vocation, and that happened to be the blood sister of the bishop, who, of course, at this time, he was, I believe, secretly ordained, and he, of course, was living in hiding. And, but Hungary's situation was a little worse than Slovakia. In Slovakia, the sisters were assigned to institutions by the communists. And they were allowed to pray there, but they would put them in institutions with people who could not learn. Mentally handicapped people, that they couldn't pass on the faith. That was their objective, that they weren't going to be teaching and passing on this Christianity. And they also, and some of the sisters worked in those institutions, others were just had to disperse and live in secular work. In Hungary, they were sent out similarly, but in Slovakia, while they could take some members secretly and get away with it, in Hungary, they were stricter with the religious and they couldn't take any vocations. So this sister of the bishop who joined them never lived with the community. She continued to live and take care of her elderly mother. So therefore, when the freedom came, in Hungary, there were only very old sisters. But they did get some new recruits who eventually couldn't stay with them because they didn't have the same vision of religious life. The old sisters wanted to reestablish everything the way that it used to be. And the young people wanted a different style of religious life. So this happened not just to our own community, but to most communities across Hungary. It was a different situation than the other countries. So let me show you these pictures. Well, how did we talk to them? We did go there. This is the Mariapot shrine as it was, and within the past few years, they uncovered, that's an icon with a special white cover over it, and then medals have been put on there by people who have received miracles. That's the icon that I grew up with in Baba and Zedlo's house in Trenton, New Jersey. That's the iconostas in that same church. When you're facing the iconostas, the image that we just saw is to your left. You have to climb up the stairs to be near the icon. So, what happened? Pope John Paul decided to go there very early, August of 1991. We didn't even have the monastery in our hands at the beginning of 91, but because the Pope was coming, they had to give it to us. They had to make things look normal. They painted the church. They repainted the church. It was gray when we first saw it. It was made beautiful Austrian yellow, as they called it. And then these buildings on the bottom, the bishop was able to build a guest quarters for pilgrims that come, because this basilica is a great pilgrimage site all the year. And up in the left corner, after Pope John Paul was there, someone carved this statue with 16 folds in the arms of Jesus to represent 16 countries released from communism. And the liturgy was in a large field within sight of the basilica, but a little distance away. I was able to go there, and this is the sister who was the sister of the bishop. Sister Basilia is her name. And I was able to go there and help them with community life issues and different things like that as well, because she spoke English. I'm with Sister Maria also, who worked with us in Rome, in Budapest. St. Matthew's Cathedral in Budapest. And then we'll go on to Ukraine. Okay, so this is the Carpathian Mountains in Ukraine. Also very beautiful. And here we are in 1990. Okay, so this story of Ukraine is a little different because the Soviet Union did not fall when those other dominoes occurred. Okay, the Greek Catholic Church was allowed to register as legal, but the people were so frightened that it was a slow process to try to return to a normal faith life, not faith life, because they were very strong in the underground church, very strong. But for instance, when we got there, the first trip was in May 1990, and I remember some secular people coming to the little house where our sisters gathered, and they were whispering grace before the meal. They were still whispering grace before the meal. And it was 6 months since the church was declared legal. They were that frightened. And in that same house, we were there also into June, and we had a sisters' meeting, a secret meeting. But it wasn't totally illegal anymore, it wasn't. But even though it wasn't illegal, the communist system was still in place in Ukraine. And they were stopping people on the streets at will, just asking them who you are, where are you going, where are your papers, what are you about, things like that. It was still going on. And the frightful thing was the people lived on rumors. They didn't have honest, clear information to go on. And so they were always frightening one another with rumors, and maybe maybe that was orchestrated, I don't know. But one of the rumors was that in June, everything's going to come back crashing on their heads worse than it ever was. And because there were always ups and downs with communism, sometimes real strict, sometimes more lenient, the people believed these rumors because they were always kept off guard, you know? So I was standing facing the windows, and the sisters were in front of me, and I could see out the window what they couldn't see, that a bus pulled up, a school bus pulled up. Well, this was the way that in the past they came and threatened sisters or carried them away. So I saw this happening, and I didn't know why a bus was pulling up there, but I didn't say anything to them because I didn't want to cause unnecessary fear. I just stood there and prayed it would go away. And it did. And that crashing on the heads in June did not happen. But if I could just tell you what Eastern Europe looked like in 1990, oh my Lord, it was so sad. Everything was gray. Because of the Cold War that we were fighting with them, all the money was going into arms and into the Cold War. And the cities were so neglected. The potholes, the damage, the ugliness of it all was so sad. But worst of all, the people. They wouldn't talk to each other in public. They didn't smile or laugh. They walked like burdened souls. You know? It was so sad. Praise God, I saw it change. As the 90s went on and communism fell also in the Soviet Union, August 1991, then things began to change. The economy changed. The people had colorful clothes, smiles on their faces, able to talk in public, and the resurrection of the churches was the most incredible thing. So here we are with our sisters in our first two visits. The sisters asked us Americans, Sister Dia and myself, right here, not to wear our habits on the first two times we were there, which would have been 1990. And so we didn't. So the rest of them, the sister in a habit is from Slovakia, and the others are from Ukraine. And on the right, you see some of the young new members, and in the middle, of course, the older ones who have been there for a while. This was in Chernobyl, I believe. Here's a picture of Pentecost Sunday. May 1990, we were there, Pentecost Sunday. The churches are now legal for 6 months, and they began to operate those wherever they did have churches that they could use, the Greek Catholics. And this Pentecost was wonderful. Even the buses had green branches on them, the trolleys and so forth, and everything was decorated. And the churches were so full, we never got inside this church, nor any other ones that we tried. Everybody, the crowds were swollen to the outside, and there was not enough Eucharist. It didn't receive Holy Communion on Pentecost Sunday because we were in a crowd singing outside. So that Sister Dia in the gray suit in the front, she was our Mother Superior, and her family members, and one sister right behind her. And the young man on the right, a few months later, was ordained a priest. He was in preparation, secretly. I'm sorry, this picture's distorted, but I had to keep it in here because Sister Nadia and I met these 3 journalists from Kiev, and it was the most mind-blowing thing. They said to us, we never knew that we were being fed all this propaganda. We were being told we were the best country in the world. They kept showing us films of the United States of America, waiting in gas lines. Remember 1973, anybody? Okay. Any disaster similar to that they said, oh, ad nauseum. We saw the movies of your long gas lines and so forth. And they would feed us anything negative about the Western countries and tell us we had it better than anybody in the world, and we believed it. And we passed this word on. These were journalists from Kiev. Blew my mind. And so, think, to live in an untruth, culturally, all around, was just unbelievable. So here we are in May 1990. We're in Assumption Church, I believe it was, right in the middle of Lviv, Ukraine. And this is the church where in November, okay, how did the church get free in these countries? Partly because in 1988, the Ukrainians put on, and Russians, others as well, put on a great celebration for the millennium of Christianity in that part of the world. They said even Russia and all Ukraine, all of the Soviet bloc and so forth. Outsiders mostly added to this, meaning people from the United States, Canada, Australia, Argentina, wherever the immigrants went to. And so they got the world's attention to the plight of the people still under oppression for their faith in these countries. And so that began to change, and Gorbachev's in power. There's some lightening of the oppression going on. And in this very church, in November, so before churches were declared legal, in November, the priest stood up one Sunday and said, "My folks, I must tell you the truth. I am a Greek Catholic priest." He was functioning in this Orthodox church. And he said, "And who are you?" And they said, "We're Greek Catholics too." So that's how some of the people lived the faith. They went to the Orthodox churches knowing in their hearts the whole time, we're Greek Catholics, and when we can be Greek Catholics again, we will be. And it happened. So the magic has been reversed. All of a sudden, the Greek Catholics are numerous all over the country, and this begins to happen. So right after that, we got word that our sisters had participated in Habits in a protest, a march, and December 1st was the legalization officially, and a couple weeks later we got the first phone call saying the resurrection is happening. So this is a few months later, Easter. We're there in Habits this time, and to my right is the new superior and one of her counselors over here, Sister Suzanne. This sister over here to the far left, she and her family were punished in Siberia for living their faith when she was just a child. And out of her life of suffering, she became a beautiful poet and has published a few books of poetry. So this is Easter too. We don't keep this tradition as much, but the Ukrainians do, and that is after the Easter morning liturgies, the people all gather in a park and party hardy. Because they believe, after all the fasting of Lent, then you must really celebrate the resurrection. And so here they are, the guys are climbing up on and there's things going on all over the place.
There's a priest in the middle.
That could be. Strong young men. But it was a time of marvelous joy, and what an experience. We had been praying all night. Cardinal Lubachevsky returned from exile, which he was in Rome. He was allowed to return to Ukraine, and we had an all-night vigil for the Resurrection Matins and Divine Liturgy. So that was from 11 p.m. till 5 a.m. And this was later in that same day. Just as an example of the devotionalism that was popular, do you see 1, 2, 3 statues of Mary in front of the icon of Mary, of perpetual health? Okay, some of our young sisters, eventually, sisters from Australia, helped us to get the money to purchase and renovate a small house, and that was where to this day, we have our novitiate. I had one day in Kiev, marvelous, incredible churches there. What a place. This is the first meeting of all the bishops, Ukrainian bishops around the world. They're Sobor, and they're gathering, and they finally got back St. George's Cathedral and Chancery Building, and that's the celebration of all of this. on that particular day. Don't have the date. And then monuments began to spring up, religious monuments finally. Some of the great statues of Stalin and Lenin began to topple, and the religious monuments went up. This is the mother house, the main house in Lviv, Ukraine, with our sisters and the young, new ones. And I learned Ukrainian because I can't be with people without talking to them. So I learned Ukrainian and Italian, and here I am in a formation meeting with young sisters. This is where I lived in Rome, and so there's a sister from, oh, sorry, go back to that. So in our international headquarters, so there's Brazil, Slovakia, United States, Romania, Brazil, Slovakia, Ukraine. Just some of them, that's not even everybody. We brought students from some of the countries so that they could get degrees in Rome. And some more formation stuff. And one of my great privileges was to be the superior who received the vows of these first 3 new members out of the Prešov group in Slovakia. You know those sisters, don't you, Father? Right? Okay, so that's the slideshow, and I'm willing to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. Here we go.
I just want to tell everybody that Sister was running around taking books and stuff to these people that she's showing us Catholic books. We were on a bus and she was afraid. She had stuff. She was afraid that they came in and took the whole car apart. I played Ukraine and Sister had books. They was taking to these people. She's a smuggler.
Sister smuggler, okay.
Mostly we smuggled in money. Sometimes I had it up here. Sometimes here.
Any left up here?
No. No, it had to go to the right places, you know. They needed it, you know, you understand.
Here we go.
Are they being oppressed right now in the Crimea region because of what has happened?
I would think so. We don't have sisters there, so I don't have facts.
Yeah, our parishes are still in existence in Crimea with the Russian occupation. The priests who are there, they sent their families, their wives and children back to Western Ukraine, and the husbands, the priests, they stayed behind. Bishop Michael, who's in charge of Crimea, has not been granted a visa to come back into his diocese, into the exarchate. But yeah, there is oppression. There is, yeah. Anyone else?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about what roles I was able to play other than the formation things. I'll tell you the most dramatic story rather than... Okay, so Sister Dia, the superior, and I were in Ukraine in August 1991. I told you that's the month that communism fell. It didn't fall till August 24th, but our story is on August 8th. So we were coming back with a priest ostensibly, but he was actually a secretly ordained bishop, the one they put eventually into not Bratislava, Vienna. I can't think of his name. Anyway, you would know. So we were in his old car, and we visited Bishop Simony in Ujjaran, and then we headed for the border, expecting this afternoon we will be back in Slovakia, just across the border. So we got there at noon, and it was a super hot day. Picture a cloudless sky like today, but in the 80s or 90 degrees. And Sister Dia, who was with us, had a head cold. The priest was an elderly man in his 70s probably then. And we got to the border, And in 15 minutes, the cars moved up a little bit. So we were hopeful that this line is going to keep moving. Borders were an incredible experience every time. And sometimes the government was very strict with the border guards, and sometimes they were lenient, so they didn't know what was going on a lot of times. And there was plenty of corruption going on there too, because they wanted to get what they could out of people passing borders, and all kinds of stuff went on. So this particular day, after we moved for once, we didn't move again for a long time, so we talked to the people in front of us and behind us. They said, oh no, we're going to be here 24 hours. We said, what? They said, that's the word. So we said, please hold our place in line, because the 3 little bottles of water we had with us, we were done with. There was nothing you could buy there, because this was when there was a tension between Yeltsin and Gorbachev, this particular moment. And so when there was tension like that, the people were much more afraid to break any rules. So we said, okay, we'll hold our place. We're going to go to the next town and see if we can get through over there. On the way, we stopped to get water in the store, but Father had given away all of his rubles, and Sister had given away all of her rubles because they're useless outside of Ukraine. And we couldn't buy a bottle of water. But some lady had mercy on him, because the store would usually take a $1 bill, but they wouldn't, and in the fear. So some lady had mercy and bought us some water. We went on to the town of Chop, where 3 countries come together. And the policeman said, oh, sorry, it's going to take 3 days to get through the border here. So we returned to Uzhhorod and started looking for the place where our sisters lived. It's not marked, of course, but we knew it was across the street from a certain church. But what church in this whole city of churches? And so we wandered around. Eventually, the priest is driving, and he takes a road that takes you on the periphery of the city, and it's going up this long hill. And we knew we were in the right place. And the radiator boiled over in this old car. So we had to stop. Sister Dia jumped out, and by now, and she said, I'm going to ask this lady for help over here. You get water for the car and meet me down the bottom of the hill. Okay, so we agreed to do that. So we got the water, that was no problem. She met this woman and started walking down the hill with her. Her name was Magdalene. And as they went down the hill, Magdalene told Sister Dia, I'm so glad you came and asked for my help, because I was on my way home to kill myself. She said, exactly a month ago today, my husband died suddenly. I just stopped at his place, and I decided I have nothing to live for. We were communists. We have no children. Things are falling apart for the communists. And I felt I had nothing, but now you need my help. So she said, let's go to my friend's house. She knows where your sisters live. And so she helped us then to get to our sisters, and we told them, this was 5 o'clock now, we'll be back if we can't get through the border tonight, but this lady's going to try to help us get through the border. Would you believe the husband that died was in charge of that border crossing until he died? So she said, I'll call my husband's friends and they'll help you. Well, we went to her house. Of course, first we picked up a couple of the young sisters from that building. They came over and she sent them to the market, because the first thing you have to do is eat. And she couldn't call her husband's friends till evening when they came back from work. So we ate. She started calling, couldn't get any of them. So then we had to have supper too. So, and she's beginning to come back to life, you know? And she and this priest have some mutual acquaintances and so forth. And so we stayed there. She kept calling until 10 o'clock at night, and we finally said, we're going to go back to the convent and stay the night. Sister was quite sick with a head cold too. So in the morning, she comes back and she sends her friend back, and it tells us the arrangement. We're going to have to meet them at a certain time, certain place, and they're going to help us get through the border. So we got there, and indeed, they had arranged 2 vans to lead us. She said that the reason it took all morning is because when we have the car, we don't have the gas. When we have the gas, we don't have the car. Things were so poor, believe me. And so finally, they helped us. They said, follow this van, And when you get to this point, you're going to see the guards zoom right past them and go to the next set. That's what we had to do. When we zoomed past them, got to the crossing where we had to go through the customs people, across from us in the next lane was the green car that had been in front of us 24 hours before.
Oh my goodness.
Honest. Unbelievable. So just how much the people put up with in the culture to start with, never mind the destruction within the churches, you know. But I'm happy to say the churches are flourishing. Many beautiful resurrections have happened. There was a spike in vocations for a while, and in religious life it's fallen down. With priests, it's still pretty good, I think. And you know, we need to pray for them because everything has attacked them to take faith from secularization, which is having its effects. Pornography, alcoholism, and especially wanting to own more and more and more, you know. Freedom, all the challenges of freedom they didn't know what to do with. So pray for us, pray for them. God bless you.
Thank you, Sister Barbara Jean, and God works in mysterious ways. And our library ministry here at this table, what do we have here?
Oh, I'm sorry I didn't tell people.
I brought a whole display of things here. This is a prized possession the day after the Soviet Union fell, and it announces the demise of the Communist Party in the Soviet bloc. August 25th, the day after it all happened. And then I have many photos here, even of our sister Theophilia, who was a helper of Bishop Romja, one of her protectors, and the way they poisoned him was that they forced her out of the room where she was nursing him, and they poisoned him in that short time when they forced her out. And many other things here if you have time to come and see.
And now we're going to have a presentation, Sister. Thank you for being with us. If our library ministry would please come up.
You're the sponsors of this great event, right?
Some of the other libraries.
Come on up, come on up.
Thank you. And you have a whole committee, huh? What a beautiful addition here.
I brought you 3 bags of books today. They're in my trunk. I need help to get them out.
So here we have a replica of our anniversary icon. We have Christ seated upon the throne, his blessed mother, offering prayerful supplications, and Gregory of Nazianzus, our patron saint, holding the replica of our church. So this is for Mount Caprina. Next we have a card and an envelope.
Delighted to have you here today, and it's been a very remarkable experience, and we're so happy that you all stayed for it. It's wonderful. And we're going to ask this to sign our guest card.
So thank you everyone for being here. Please stop by the display. And we're getting a picture right now. And thank you everyone. Have a blessed Sunday. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Okay, that's all.